All right, we are now recording.
Okay. Okay, folks. Good morning. This is Dr. Hyman. I'm working out of Los Angeles and hope to get to meet you directly one day. What we're going to do is walk through the AMA guides, in particular with activity of daily living. A lot of times you will pick up recommendations on impairment evaluations, disability evaluations, how to approach these patients. But one of the things that doesn't necessarily come through is certain ways of approaching patients and how to gather the information. And so a lot of the people that have sat through my talks before have found them very helpful, because what they find is that when they're using questionnaires, it helps them document what the patients are experiencing, what they're claiming, supporting your opinion. Also, practically, it saves time because you're gathering information from somebody in writing, which helps guide you in what you're going to do. So what this does is it makes your exams more efficient and more documentable. And further, what will happen is that this talk will give you a chance to try to look through some of the different types of questionnaires that you can use and use them in your practice. And so I'm going to run you through a whole bunch of information on different types of questionnaires to help guide you so that you can figure out what you might want to incorporate into your practice and into your exams. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to take you through it, and then I will definitely want to see some questions in the chat. I will try to get to them whenever I can. Other piece, just to let you know, is this talk does not usually take the full time. And so when we finish, you will have the opportunity, if you choose, to go join another session, in the when they're making their little break halfway through. Okay, so here we go. Disclaimers, which I always have to do whenever I speak, just so you've seen it all. I did not say what you thought I said. You did not hear what you thought you heard. And I am not a victim. Take my advice. I'm not using it. So those are the disclaimers I want to let you know. First of all, the books. Also, I have to show those whenever I'm speaking because it's a potential conflict of interest. That those of us that wrote the books, we do get royalties on these books. And again, something I don't think that's going to be covered much in the way today, but nonetheless, there it is, full disclosure. I get paid by MD guidelines. Again, something not discussed today, and normally I'd be here in the office seeing patients, so the conflict of interest is I'm not getting paid, but I'm sitting in my office. Okay, the comments from today, some of them can be found in one of the AMA Guides books, which I did not edit, so I don't get royalties, but just to let you know, some of those points are in there. Guides to Evaluation of Functional Ability. Acknowledgements also are my staff, co-editors, and these are some of my boys. Okay, activities of daily living, things that we do, right? So this is the way that we have to start thinking about how to break down the approach. Okay, so here we go, pay attention. Could you leave the bubble wrap alone for 5 seconds and look at these? Okay, so look at these, please pay attention, here we go. Chapters 1 and 2. If somebody says, look, I'm new to this area, I don't know what to do, I'm not sure how to approach things, I always say to people, please read chapters 1 and 2 of the AMA guides. Because if you read those chapters, you'll know 80 to 90% of what you need to know. And that will help guide you in what you need to start approaching when you're talking to a patient. Remember, the guides are a guide to impairment, right? Not disability. And notice the key definition that underlies the entire AMA guides. Look. Impairment percentages reflect the degree to which a medical condition decreases individual ability to perform activities of daily living, excluding work. So all of a sudden you see why this is such a central feature of anything you're going to do. Because when you are giving your opinion, when you are trying to say to somebody, this is how you should look at this, when you are considering what impairment percentage you're assigning, when you get a letter from a lawyer that says, how could you, right? You have to have a documentation. Keep this in mind all the time. I default to this all the time. When people say, well, how could you say this? How's it? Or you picked a number that's in a different range, right? Or you didn't use this method, use that method, right? So you have to start being able to default to this, right? And this is going to help support your opinion. It's going to protect you, right? When you look at ADLs, they talk about two types, right? So mobility types and self-care types, right? And so when we look at definitions, right? You're looking, this is table 1-1 that looks at the ADLs and the IADLs. Now notice. Look at these ADLs here at the top, right? So those are the basic ADLs that were originally developed to look at people, in particular, people that had strokes, right? That's where a lot of this data originally comes from. But there's also these other ones, these parallel ones, right? Now, the impact of an injury on activities of daily living is the impairment rating. You can explain why your opinion is different. By the way, I don't mind that, right? People say, oh, well, Mark, you wrote the causation book, so you only think this causes this causes. Look, I'm just showing the data and literature, right? The impairment guides are a consensus document, right? So there's nothing wrong with them. But what you want to know is that you had other criteria that you used. Now, I'm okay with that. Just make sure that you're stating those criteria and you're giving them a chance, right? Work is not included in this, right? So again, impairment ratings, different from disability, right? That classic differential between the two, please keep that in mind. Those are two different things than what we're looking at or what we're thinking about, right? From the 5th edition of the AMA guides, we know that almost all the time, in the majority of jurisdictions, you give an impairment rating, and that number is plugged in to some formula to get to a number, right? That number is the disability number, whatever the payment, the money, that's what's used. But again, the AMA guides doesn't pretend or say that they're going to be giving you a specific amount. What you have to do is stay focused on the impairment and justifying your opinion, right? Now, when you look at the guides and the literature, there's very little guidance on which instrument to use. And generally, you and I didn't get a lot of training on thinking about activities of daily living, but nonetheless, we have to try to make use of this, right? So when you use any questionnaire, there's certain underlying theories. Now don't go crazy on me on this stuff. I'm just showing it to you, just so you know that there's some thinking behind this, right? And so those are psychometric parameters, which means how reliable are these answers? How statistically valid is this going to be that we can rely on these kinds of questionnaires, right? So there's the concepts that are inherent here called classical test theory, and that's probably the most widely used form and can be used. There's item response theory. This is more modern psychometrics, and you can see all these different terms, right? I'm not saying you got to remember this stuff. I'm not saying you have to justify yourself as a statistician. What I'm saying is that if somebody comes to you in a deposition or in an interrogatory or is questioning your opinion, and they say, how could you rely on a piece of paper? You say, well, it looks like a piece of paper, but there's these principles underlying all these types of questions and how we approach them, okay? Now, problems with the ADLs. As I mentioned to you before, a lot of these came from institutionalized areas. It came from people who had strokes, right? And there is ongoing research in this area of how to approach these types of problems, right? And how to get to a questionnaire that's going to help you and guide you, okay? So what are we looking for? We're obviously looking for a high precision and high accuracy questionnaires, right? And we're not trying to scare away spectators by having a terrible questionnaire. So that's what we're trying to get at. That's our goal, right? All right, so here's a rest stop. Those are my boys when they were very young. They got much bigger. Okay, here we go, another rest stop. We keep the holy cow in the barn and the holy mackerel in the lake. I guess I'll tell you what's in there. Okay, so I'm not going to give you any kind of nonsense. I'm going to try to give you a lot of help, right? So what's that going to look like? Okay, so here we go. I'm going to look at some of the guides in the 5th edition, some of the guides, the 6th edition. I'm going to look at the literature with you. And at the end, I want you to figure out what works best for you, right? And so what works best for you could vary a lot. It depends on your practice, what types of patients you see. And so watch this carefully, because you're going to be able to pick out what you think is an important thing to incorporate into your reports, into your evaluations, into your understanding. And by the way, I use some of my questionnaires for my regular private patients. It has nothing to do with any kind of medical, legal environment, personal injury environment, workers' compensation, disability, none of that stuff. I'll use some of my questionnaires for my regular private patients because it helps guide me on certain things. Which, by the way, it's totally fine, whatever you do. There's another talk I'm giving today on pain questionnaires. And again, same kinds of principles are going to be there on the pain questionnaires. And I've had a lot of the folks through the years, the orthos, tell me it's one of the most helpful talks they've been to, that they got a lot of pointers that they incorporated into their practice, right? All right, so let's stay with the ADLs for now. Here we go. Okay, so take a look. These are the ADLs from the AMA Guides 5th edition, okay? These are the areas that are recommended to be discussed, covered, understood, looked at from the ADLs in the guides, right? So see that list, right? See, there's got 8 different categories, right? Okay, so let's go through. What we're going to do is we're going to go through the ADLs in the 5th edition, and I'm going to show you what I think are some of the difficulties and limitations. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go through some other ones, right? So let's do the 5th one first. Okay, here we go. OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in the European countries. They had a website on this stuff, and this is the first one recommended by the AMA Guides 5th edition. It's a long-term disability questionnaire. The database for it begins in 1997, and this instrument was published in 81. Nobody uses it. It's not easily retrievable. This is the first one recommended by the 5th edition of the AMA Guides. I don't recommend it at all because it doesn't meet any criteria that would be helpful for us, right? But nonetheless, it's in the AMA Guides, just so you've seen it once. Okay, next, the hack. I call it the hack. This is from Fries at Stanford, and this was originally developed for rheumatology. Oh, okay, wait. So rheumatology, right? So I'm saying, okay, well, that involves a lot of joints. That's very classic for kind of an orthopedic injury, some impact on activities, daily living. Okay, that's reasonable, right? And I even gave you here some of the links that you can get it. So there's an explanation, and it's still used sometimes in the FDA approval processes. Not bad. Okay, so let's take a look. The hack. Positives. It's still used, even though it was developed many years ago, but it is like an integrated health questionnaire, which means that's a very long form. And if you're really just looking for the ADLs, then what you would do is just use pages 2, 3, 20, and 21. Now, there's a couple points here. One is that, again, it's going to be a questionnaire that can be helpful. Well, let's take a look. How helpful? Well, you cover 4 of the 8 areas. So once again, ready? Stay with me. There's 8 areas that you're supposed to have. This only covers 4 of them. It's better that you have some questionnaire than no questionnaire, but you're also missing other areas, right? And another thing, when you have this integrated health questionnaires, a lot of them have those VAS scales, right? So those are the ones that are the straight line on a piece of paper. And then people are supposed to make a mark on them. And then what you're supposed to do is get out a ruler and measure them. Okay, this has a whole bunch of issues with it. First of all, people end up making copies of copies. So all of a sudden those lines get wavier, different lengths. 2, you sometimes have to spend time trying to look at these lines and trying to measure them and stuff, and that takes time. Number 3, some people even try to put little hash marks on them to try to make it a little more reliable to know where somebody's rating themselves. But what it turns out is that it's better to have somebody write a direct number and not just push a slash on a line. So please keep that in mind as another trick, another technique of why I'm not as crazy about that. But if you wanted to use something and you want to have something that would be helpful to you, here you go. Here's the hack. Okay, next, FIM. The FIM, this is based on use in the rehab population. The FIM is proprietary, which means you'd have to pay for it. We are doctors. Doctors don't like to pay for anything, and so ain't going to happen. And so that's the truth of that particular questionnaire, right? the Barthel. Next one recommended, 5th edition, right? Named after the original author, and this was after chronic conditions like age, arthritis, and CHF, heart failure. Okay, well, hold on, wait. Let's think about this, right? Okay, so chronic conditions like age, yeah, kind of helpful. On the other hand, generally, if you're doing workers' comp, disability evaluations, tends to be a younger population. Heart failure tends to be a younger population. Arthritis, tends to be, again, not in that younger population. So again, it does have elements that could be helpful. It does have an idea of how you could use it. But again, if we take a look at it, it doesn't have strong areas of coverage. And one other important point, it's not a self-report instrument, which means, remember I told you that a lot of these things were developed in institutional settings. So they were developed for staff, nurses, caregivers, to fill them out on behalf of the patient, right? But there's good literature that says that when you're doing any kind of disability evaluation, impairment evaluation, you should be doing these things yourself with the patient. Because when the patients don't self-report, there could be other things operating which colors the interpretation, right? They could be saying things one way, but a caregiver, a wife, somebody who has a secondary interest could say things differently, right? So we don't like self-report instruments in that regard, right? When we look at coverage, if you use the Barthel, you get 2 areas of coverage, right? So again, I'd rather you use a questionnaire than no questionnaire. I'm trying to get you to support your reports. It's good to have something going, but even here, you got some weaknesses in coverage. Nonetheless, it's one of the ones that's recommended by the AMA Guides 5th edition, right? Okay, the CATS index, okay? The CATS index is named after its original author in 63, right? And again, I gave you a link to it. Now notice, look. Look where this comes from. Gerontologist, right? See that? So once again, not a big surprise because we already talked about that a lot of these things had to do with institutionalized people, had to do with people who had strokes, right? So this is not the kind of population that you generally see. Nonetheless, it's recommended by the guides, okay? CATS, let's take a look. The good news, it's only 6 questions. The bad news, it's only 6 questions, right? So, you say, well, I can get a real quick answer here. Yes, you can, but look, what are you gonna get? You're gonna get one area, right? So you could say, well, it's recommended by the AMA Guides. Okay, it's true, right? And I'd rather you do something than nothing. But once again, I want you to think about how you're supporting your opinion. I'm trying to protect you so that you have good documentation to substantiate your opinions in the report, okay? Next, functional status rating system. This is based on use in rehab populations, okay? And this actually looked good on paper. So this actually came from a hospital here in Southern California. It was in the AMA Guides 5th edition. So I called the hospital. I said, I'd like to look at your questionnaire. I do research in this area. I'm writing a chapter for a book. I lecture on this stuff. And they had no idea what I was talking about. And this is where it supposedly comes from. And the other part is there's no literature behind it. So forget about it. Okay, next. Also recommended in the 5th edition, the ORS. Now, the ORS is a big data set, right? It talks about the older American resources and services, and it's based on the general elderly population. Okay, now multiple issues here, multiple issues. First of all, we've already talked about, some of the overlap between elderly, institutionalized versus injured workers, disability, those kinds of things. Again, there's a little bit of stuff there. It is recommended by the 5th edition. The next issue, it's proprietary, which means you'd have to pay for it. Remember, we talked about this. We are doctors. We don't like to pay for anything. And also, I went to the University of Michigan. I will never give any money to Duke University, so don't do this one. Okay, next. The MLS, medical outcome study. Okay, the MLS proprietary from UCLA ran. Now, this is my backyard, and you generally would have to pay for it, although you can get different versions at different times, and I certainly can get at it because I'm here at UCLA. And it's very good. It's well developed, and it's probably the best measures out there to look at functioning. The issues are, 1, it's a little hard to get. 2, it has a more complicated scoring system, where, you know, they invert questions. So for example, you know, you might say mild, moderate, severe, or something like that, and the next question would be severe, mild, moderate, or something like that. And so you'd have to go through and like switch around the questions to be able to score them properly. And so I think it's a great questionnaire if you really want to get into the field and really spend a lot of time and know that you're meeting all those criteria of the fancy test theories. Then this is probably the one. However, for us, the normal folks, it's long, it's complicated, and so I generally don't recommend it for a typical office setting. Okay. All right. Now, 6th edition. Right. We've done the 5th edition. Let's talk about the 6th edition. So you got this, Rust-Oleum, stop Rust. Okay. So here we go. So the 6th edition, we talked about the AMA Guide's 5th, right? We're now going to talk about the AMA Guide's 6th edition and the recommended ADLs in that area. So once again, you go to the ADLs in the 6th edition, you get a chart like this, right? And there's a very good discussion on ADLs in the book, especially at the end of chapter 15 for the upper extremities. Now, no, look. This is the quick dash and ADL questionnaires. So for the upper extremity, right? This is well researched, and you may say, well, look, Mark, turns out I'm an ortho. All I do is upper extremity. And so I'd say, okay, then, you know, this may be all you need to do, right? And that's something that could be useful for you, right? But those are going to be very chapter specific. And most people see a range of types of patients. And sometimes they're sent to you for one particular area. And then what happens is that another area comes up in evaluation, and all of a sudden you don't have yourself quite covered with what you're trying to do or trying to learn or trying to understand with that person. And in particular, remember, I'm trying to protect you. So you want to have documentation of what's really going to work, what you can rely on to help yourself. Okay? All right. So let's go ADLs not in the guides, right? So we talked about the 5th edition. We talked about the 6th edition. But there is other literature out there, right? So let's take a look at some of those, right? Okay. The Lawton. This is a review published by Lawton and gerontologists. Now notice once again, look, gerontologists, right? We've been talking about that. Where do these ADL questionnaires come from, right? What's the population they're originally designed for, right? So that's what you're talking about, right? That's what you're looking at when you're looking at that type of questionnaire, okay? Positives, right? Still widely used, got lots of area of coverage. Downside, not all the activities are simple ones. Some could be left open for interpretation, right? And it is also not a self-report instrument, right? So we talked about this, right? That the literature would support that when you're doing a history, doing a physical exam, you should do it directly with the patient, and there should be nobody else present, nobody else influence the outcome, right? And also it means that somebody else has to fill it out as opposed to the patient putting in their own words. Now, coverage. Okay, look at this. You cover 4 areas. So this is not a questionnaire recommended in the 5th or 6th edition. But you can see that it actually covers more areas than some of the other ones that are, right? Okay, RDRDs, okay? Here's a person in one job, and look what they did. Okay, now this is a rating scale published by Lynn and Lynn, right? So I like the idea of supporting husband and wife working together. Now, notice once again, look. Where does this come from? American Geriatric Society, got it? So again, not a surprise, right? Let's take a look at it. Positive. It's easy to score on a 4-point scale. Okay, well, look at that. Look. Easy to score, 4-point scale. That's going to come up again, right? Because that's something that you and I can do, right? We like simple numbers. We like quick digits. We like quick summaries to allow us to guide us on what we're going to do, okay? Okay, downsides, not all are simple tasks once again, and it's also not self-report. You know my opinion on that stuff, right? Let's take a look. Well, look, you're covering 4 areas, right? So once again, it's better to have a questionnaire than not a questionnaire. It's better covering something rather than nothing to document, but we've seen that it has a little bit of a limitation, all right, but maybe there's something that we could use, right? The daily activities worksheet, okay? Now this is a free questionnaire. Okay, so physicians go, oh, free, I like free, right? And it's a helpful website, right? Talks about Social Security, and there's a questionnaire there. about how do you impact this, how do you impact that, right? And so you go, well, hey, it's online, it's free, it doesn't sound too bad for you. Positives, it's available, got a lot of areas of coverage. Downside, there's no research behind it, there's no scoring system, and it's not bad for a site put together by a lawyer. Do you see this? Look, 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 look. The disability activities worksheet from Physician Disability Services. See the terms Physician Disability Services, but it's actually made by a lawyer. So they're trying to get people, because you fill that out and then the lawyer calls you and said, oh, I saw you filled this out. Do you have a claim, right? So not too shabby there, right? 3 areas of coverage. Okay, well, hey, want to use something? Want us to have something online? There you go. No research behind it. But again, not a bad thing to have going for you, okay? MCAP, the multidimensional activity profile. Okay, now this comes from Vertmoose Foundations with Matheson, who did the EPIC lift and the California pain diagrams. And this study used in unhealthy volunteers that showed a correlation between subjective and objective. Okay, now I want you to listen to this very carefully. This is a very important concept, right? A lot of these questionnaires are self-report instruments. So you're taking a history for someone. Somebody could say, hey, well, they're going to say that they can't do those things, but maybe they're making themselves sound worse than they are, so that they say they don't have to go back to work, or they get more money. And what this study had in it, which was very new and unique, was a couple places, right? One, there was this correlation between subjective and objectives, right? So what that could mean is that this could be helpful because it demonstrates a correlation, right? It was only done on one population. Unfortunately, it's proprietary. You have to pay for it, so you know how I feel about that. But I just want to show you some of the principles here. Look, 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 look. So look at this. Walk 3 blocks on a sideway at leisurely pace. So you can see, first of all, you're getting a visual presentation, not just words, right? Well, I like that a lot. I think that's a fantastic questionnaire. And then you would just fill it out, click one of the circles, and it just advances to the next one. Use a garden rake, button a shirt, right? Stand up quickly. So look at all those things. Look, look, look. See how intuitive these are? You're showing people with pictures what you're saying. You're using words. So you can see you're really drilling down more. And it's also taking it out of the realm of what their interpretations are as much, because they see themselves doing these activities. So that's the things I do like about that questionnaire. And I'm telling you that if you said to me, Mark, I like the idea it's online. I like the idea that you're getting these pictures and that you're getting a scoring system and that they at least have some correlation between subjectives and objectives. Well, you could say, look, this could be very helpful for substantiating your opinion, right? And so that's something to think about, right? Again, not a ton of research behind it. It's used more clinically, but it has something to be said for it. You could consider it. Okay, some other ones. Look at this. Childhood cancer is a predictor in patients who develop adult life ADL impacts, right? Just to let you know that, that there is literature that says when you're looking at why people have certain limitations later in life, it's not always the injury that's operating, okay? Here's a rest stop. Here's some of my boys a number of years ago. Okay, next, what to do? Well, I've gone over some general questionnaires, right? And then what I want to do is I want to show you some more specific questionnaires. So now this could be one of a different ways of doing these things, which means that you've seen some of the questionnaires I've shown you, you've seen the literature behind them, who wrote them, what the target audience was originally for these things. And you've seen that they all have positives and negatives, right? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you some specific questionnaires that are geared towards specific areas. So this may be that you say, well, look, if I get these special questionnaires, I'm going to be able to use them in my practice because they're already existing, right? And that's another way you could do it. But mind you, these were all developed for certain areas, okay? So let's take a look at this, right? Remember that some of these will have overlap between pain and not necessarily activity of daily living. And there are scales that are used for range of motion, for example, in the shoulder, right? But let me just start showing you some specific recommendations and certain parts of the body that you can help. Okay, first of all, low back. In general, for low back, I use the modified Roll-Morris questionnaire. Okay, here we go. So here's the modified Roll-Morris questionnaire, right? And it's got these kinds of questions, right? All lined up for you. Here's the second page of this, and this is the entire questionnaire, 23 questions. And it's developed and used in the research for patients with backs. So if you said, look, I'm a spine surgeon, the only thing I see are spines, then I may say to you, look, this might be good enough for you, right? And this may be all you need. If you say, well, I see a bunch of different ortho, but I'm always going to give them the activities daily living questionnaire that you see here, this is not going to work, right? Because it's not covering enough areas for you, right? And what happens is I'm trying to get you protected. I'm trying to get you the most thorough thing that works for you and the patient so that it substantiates your opinion, make it substantial medical evidence, makes it credible, and makes it clear that you're looking at this carefully, right? But nonetheless, if you're doing just the low back, that could be fine. Next, neck. For the cervical spine, I like, oh my Lord, hold on a second. For the cervical spine, I like the Vernon-Muir Neck Disability Index, right? The Vernon-Muir Neck Disability Index is available, again, online. It's a good questionnaire, right? And let's take a look. Here we go. So you can see how it says introductory thing, and then it has these different areas. Now notice, look carefully. This is the Vernon-Muir Neck Disability Index, right? We're trying to do this for activity daily living. Nonetheless, you're going to see some pain questions, right? Which is technically speaking not an ADL, right? And you also have one here. Look. Work, right? Well, didn't you tell me that the impairment ratings reflect the impacts on activities of daily living, excluding work? Yes, I did. So you can see that this is a good questionnaire. It was developed and used for cervical spine injury. It's a good questionnaire and has literature behind it. And I'd rather you use some questionnaire than no questionnaire, right? But once again, be aware of some of those potential limitations of using that particular study. Nonetheless, it's very good. And what you do is you would just go down this list here and you'd have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In other words, each category has a number assigned to it. So let's take a look at concentration. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And so what you could do is you just add them up from the 10 different ones. You come up with a number, and that helps guide you on some of your opinion, right? Next, upper extremity. I like the dash. I think that's what's in the literature. I think that's what's in the books, and it can be very helpful. And notice also, it uses a 5-point scale. And by the way, the dash has become so widely used, you can get it in all different kinds of languages, right? And so it's a very helpful item to have in your armamentarium because you can have it that can be used for a lot of different folks. So what's in the dash, right? So look, here you go. So here's some of the classic ones that you're going to see like, oh, I've seen this before. Open a tight jar, right trigger, right? So because they use a lot of terms interchangeably across a lot of the different activity daily living questionnaires, right? So this is one that covers a large area, but it's designed specifically for the upper extremity, right? So here's more of the questions, right? And then last, here's the last of the general questions. By the way, so you're getting 30 items, right? And you can kind of see, the different ratings on these things. You can come up with a certain number. And the dash also has, look at this, it has a work module, right? A work module. It also has a sports performing arts module, right? So you can see how well this has been designed, how much literature it has behind it, and that it can even have additional modules put in where you can say, look, I not only gave this person a dash for their upper extremity, they happen to be an athlete, they happen to be a performer, and I also did the performance module. And therefore, based on those findings, along with my examination of the history of the medical records, I identify this as the impairment level, right? You can see how persuasive this starts to get for that particular type of injury, right? Okay. Upper extremity. If you insist on a wrist hand only scale, then consider the Brigham. So, there's some of the folks through the years that said to me, well, Mark, I'm a hand wrist guy, kind of like Mark Melhorn, something. And so that's all I really do. That's all I really see. And so I don't really need or think I need any of these big general questionnaires. Okay, fair enough. All right, that's what you think, right? So here you go. Here's the Brigham Boston wrist questionnaire, right? So pretty quick, pretty simple, focused on that area, has some literature behind it. And if you said that's all you do and that's all you ever want to see, then it's fine. Could consider using that one. You got literature behind you. You got something to help substantiate your opinion. You're in good shape that way, right? Fair enough. Okay, next. Upper extremity. For the shoulder, I like the WOSI, the Western Ontario Shoulder Instability Index. Good scale. Now, once again, here we go. Now watch. Remember I talked to you about some of the aspects of the questionnaires, in particular, the VAS scales, right? So here you go. So this is the WOSI, and look, you can see all those VAS scales, right? So you can start making hashtag marks somewhere along the line, and you got to go through these different areas. So this is section A. This is the physical symptoms, right? And that's the second part of the section A. Here's section B, the sports, recreation, and work. By the way, notice. We got work in there again, right? Well, didn't we already say that the ADL should be on, should lead to the impairment rating excluding work, right? So, okay, got to be honest about it. There's always some limitation there, right? There's always going to be some discrepancy there, but nonetheless, that's what it is. Here's the next module. Look at this. Lifestyle, section C, right? And the questions for that. Here's the next section, emotional, right? So, again, if somebody's doing only shoulders, if you're only a shoulder person, that's all you ever see, or you say, well, I'll tell you what, I like the low back one, the modified roll Morris. I like the Vernon Muir neck disabilities, right? I like the Boston Brigham Women's. I like all those different ones, right? And I'm going to keep copies of all these different questionnaires in my office. And that depending on what they present with, I'm going to have them fill these things out. That is something you could also consider, right? So you could, maybe questionnaire somebody to death by, somebody who comes in from a car accident or some kind of major trauma, and they've got the hips, the knees, Okay, so again, you're going to have all kinds of questionnaires flying around, but nonetheless, you could say, look how thorough I am. I'm using lots of questionnaires from the medical literature from all different areas. Okay, fair enough. That's a fair argument, right? And so that would be something you could consider. But again, what I don't like about the VAS scales is, you see, now you got to sit there and get out your ruler, measure these things, and all I said, it just takes time. And there's good literature that suggests that you should make people write down a number as opposed to putting a mark in a line. It gives you a more reliable result over time, right? Nonetheless, that's there, okay? Lower extremity. So lower extremity is the lefts, right? And notice it's on a 0 to 4 point scale. Okay, this I like. I always like those numbers. I always like simple scales. And if you go here to the questionnaire, right, and you go to the questionnaire, what you'll see is that what you'll see here is these kinds of ratings, right? So this is very helpful, right? See this? Look. So just lower extremity. It gives you the 0 to 4. Total, you add it up out of 80 and you got a number, right? So this is very appealing, right? Quick, simple, get you a full number, you got your answer, right? And on you go, right? And so for your patient with a lower extremity injury, you could use this right out of the guides, right? So first of all, you're using something that's already recommended in the guides, and it's very specifically geared, and you're going to get some of that area. But once again, are you going to cover all areas of the 8 areas? No, right? But nonetheless, I like it, right? Next. Hip. Okay, hip and knee. So the one I like for this is the WOMAC. Now, the WOMAC is proprietary, which means you have to pay for it. And I originally tried to do this honestly by going to them and saying, look, I do this research, I do this writing, and they said, well, we're the great WOMAC or some of that. So anyways, when people give me that, I just ignore them and go find it in the literature. So I went and found it for you. So if you'd like to look, you have the Womack, here it is for you. And once again, you see this, you see, look. So it was originally developed. McMaster University does excellent work in this area, excellent work. And so they have a 0 to 4 rating scale, right? So once again, you can get those different types of questions and circle them up and have a questionnaire. And for this particular area of the body, very good, a lot of research behind it, totally reasonable, okay? Next, the foot. So if you're doing this, the one that's in the guides, the 6th edition, which I like and I think is supported by the literature, is the what I call the FADI. And look here we go. So this is the FADI, where they have you use these different questions. And by the way, they also have one for sports, right? So the right-hand side is sports, left-hand side. So what you do is it even has an explanation here for you. It says, look, down here, it says, here's how you rate it, right? So you're just going to have a questionnaire. You're going to have all these things on your questionnaire, and you're going to be able to get a score for this, right? And add it all up, and that gives you an idea of where you're at. So it's going to be out of 104 points, and then if you do these sports, that's up to 32 points, and then you can kind of have an idea of what to do with it, right? So fair enough. That's for the foot, and it's totally reasonable. Okay. All right. So that's a rest stop. All right. So what we've talked about is the following things. We've talked about the original information that underlies these areas. We've talked about the criteria of how the impairment ratings are dependent on the ADLs. We've talked about how we think about this in the 5th edition, how we think about it in the 6th edition, how we've talked about it in questionnaires that are not in the guides, right? And we've also talked about very specific ones for different parts of orthopedic injury, right? So you start getting a feeling of what do you want to do in your practice? What would work for your practice, right? Let's just do a few simple ones that generally most of you aren't going to see, but nonetheless you got it. Alzheimer's, they have one. It's the CATS. If you remember the CATS ADL was the one that had 6 questions, but it doesn't really matter. They got Alzheimer's, so they're not going to remember it anyways, right? Next one, burns, right? There's an ADL for burns, right? There's ones for heart, right? There's ones for GI, right? And there's ones obviously for geriatrics because that's where a lot of this literature came from. There's ones for the neurology because that's where a lot of this literature came from, right? And by the way, there is one in the AMA guides for neurology. If you have an overlap with neurology, you want to question that. Again, the AMA guides 5th edition recommends this particular unit out of University of Texas, but of course you had to pay for it. And of course, doctors don't like to pay for anything. By the way, when you're doing this stuff late at night, you find all kinds of things like an ADL for lepers. So just lets you know that I don't have a life when I'm finding these things in the middle of the night when I'm putting my talks together. So there you go. Okay, so rest stop. Okay, so I want to go through one more section, okay? This is the final section, so stay with me on this, right? We've talked about how all these questionnaires have pluses and minuses. In particular, we've talked about some of the strengths and weaknesses, what areas they cover, what areas they don't cover, how they're scored, how you can use them, okay? So what do you do with all that information? So here's what I did, okay? For a general patient, or to cover all your bases, especially if you see a cross-section of illness, I recommend the Hyman hack, which is me. And so you don't have to do that, by the way. But what I did is I hacked it together. So I took questions from more than one questionnaire to cover my bases. I used readily available instruments that you don't have to pay for. I use a form that the patient has to fill out. Remember, I told you, it is better to have the patient fill it out than you to do it for them, right? You need something simple to score, right? Because we're busy. I don't have a lot of time. I don't have to sit there and try to put together a whole long, extensive computerized based scoring system. You need something that's brief, right? So I was able to get this all onto one page, so it doesn't take a lot of time, and something that's easy to read. By the way, there's importance of some of these questions have to be written at more simple educational level to make sure that they're understood and used, right? I picked the hack, the original hack, for the sentence structure, easiest scoring, and I had questions that were not covered, okay? So this gets a little busy. It's a little hard to see, but this is the Hyman hack. This is the questionnaire, right? And what you see here is, if you watch carefully, so look, right? This is without difficulty, some difficulty, with much difficulty, unable to do. And then what you do is, you see here, I got the self-care, communication, physical activity, sensory, hand activities, travel, and sleep personal, right? And so what the patient does is they go through and they put little check marks along the way here. And those check marks are important because that's how you're going to score this, right? So what you do is you put the different scores, so 0, 1, 2, 3, right? So you have those different categories, right? And what you do is you identify the worst score in each of the 7 categories. There's 7 of them there. You divide by 7, and you result between 0 and 3. Now, what happens? First of all, here's the area of coverage. You got all 8 of them, right? Because we put it together, because we hacked it together, right? We're able to get these questionnaires to go through and get us covered in all the areas. So all of a sudden you see, look. You know, you're getting a situation where if somebody comes to you in an interrogatory, if somebody comes to you in deposition and says, what's the basis of your opinion? Oh, the impairment ratings are based on the AMA guides, and the AMA guides is based on the impacts of activity, daily excluding work. Oh, well, doctor, I looked at the beginning of the AMA guides, chapter 1, and I see here that these are the areas that they recommend you cover. Did you cover all those 8 areas? Right? All of a sudden you say, okay, well, yeah, I did, right? And so all of a sudden they start taking the wind out of sails, and they can say, well, you know, what answer did you get, right? Well, their result was 1.1, okay? And so that's part of the reason that I justified my opinion, right? And so you can start to have that available. Which, by the way, this questionnaire that I showed you, let me just get back to that. This questionnaire has been published a few times. So one, part of it was in the AMA Guides book, but a part of it was just published recently. I did a paper for the Journal of Occupational Environmental Medicine, right? And that paper, because it was on basically coronavirus, frankly, that paper, which was published in September in the Journal of Occupational Environmental Medicine, has this in it. So it is a peer-reviewed document. Got it? A peer-reviewed document, right? So you can start to see how that could also be very helpful for you if you're trying to justify your opinion, right? All right, now, we talked about coverage. Okay, there is no perfect scale. What works for one patient may not work for another. What works in one practice may not work for another. The bigger problem is not which scale. The bigger problem, you need to ask questions. Okay, so just a few things on the conclusion. Okay, here we go. We talked about that I'm trying to protect you. We talked about I'm trying to give you the best guidance possible of what you can use in your practice. I've talked about how these different scales have pluses and minuses. We've talked about what makes them easy, what makes them hard, what is the literature behind them, right? And this is the kind of stuff that you have to have in your toolbox, right? Something that you have to take all this information of all the different ways of thinking of these things, the causation analysis, the return to work analysis, you gotta have this in there somewhere so that it's justifying your opinion, it's protecting you, it's getting documentation of what you need to know and what's important to have in the reports. Okay, all right, so that's it. That's the talk. As promised, I told you we'd be right about an hour, and that covers all the areas. Now, what we're going to do is I'm going to come out of the slides and let you see the whole human being, and we're open. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take any questions from anybody from this session and answer any questions. I'm available to you. If you want to shift over to another talk, totally fine. But if anybody has any questions, please feel free to shoot them at me right now. You can either, I guess, they'll let you unmute yourself, or you can send it to me in a chat and we can talk about it. Okay, I'm up for you. I'm ready for anybody's questions.
Dr. Hyman, John Evans.
Yes, hi, John.
Great lecture. Is it possible to convert your Hyman hack to a 1 to 4 score for a functional adjustment score using the 6th edition?
Yes. So what I do is I originally pick 0 to 3. I don't have any problems picking a 1 to 4. Now, technically, what would be ideal, John, in that scenario would be to have probably another range of options. Because I've got some difficulty, much difficulty, or unable to do. So you can see in your scenario, you kind of want to have a 0 in there somewhere where you don't have any impact on activity living, but now you want to get up to a 4. So how could you do that? One, you could add another whole category, or I guess what you could do is you could have a 0, 1, 2, and 4, right? And just skip the 3 in there and not have that within the gradation. But probably if you're really trying to get it more compliant that way, then I think you could probably add another category, and that could get you there.
Thank you, sir.
Oh, absolutely. Anybody else?
There's a question in the chat from Dr. Liebert.
Okay, nobody loves me. I didn't get it.
She says, this is an excellent talk. Do we have permission to use the Hyman hack as a template in our work?
Oh, yes. So thank you very much. So first of all, yeah, for some reason the chat didn't come to me, so I apologize. I didn't get the chat. So I'm so glad that you read it out, and please feel free to do that. If somebody just read it out to me or just unmute yourself, I'm happy to take a question. First of all, it is not proprietary, because I already told you I hate proprietary because we're all cheap. We don't want to pay for anything. Two, if you want to use it, you may want to go, it may be easier. I haven't really thought about this yet, but you may want to go to the Journal of Occupational Environmental Medicine in September 2020 in our article on coronavirus, because it's sitting there. And sometimes, if you go to the website, they sometimes have the tables or figures in its own PDF or something like that. And so that might be a good way for you to get it. The next thing is if you're going to use my questionnaire, you have to call my mother in Michigan and tell her I did a good job, so that she knows that her son is doing something useful in this world. Yeah, and otherwise, I guess you could extract it from the start, or the other thing you could do is just call my office, and the gals could send you a copy if that would help you out. And happy to do that.
Dr. Hyman, can I make an announcement real quick? I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
Just for the attendees and for yourself, if you decide to leave this session, there's a button on the lower right-hand side, and it says leave room, and then you can hit that, and then you can leave the room, or you can go to the breakout button and then choose which other breakout room you want to go to. I just want to make that announcement.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else got any questions I can help people with? We're good? Okay. Everybody, I want to thank you so much. And I hope it's helpful for you. Hope it's helpful for your practice. If you have any other questions, just reach out to me. Happy to be there. Have a great day.
Thank you, Dr. Hyman.
Yep, thank you. I'm going to stop recording.